I really want to thank Linda and Michelle and Catherine for inviting me to be here today. It's a great honor and privilege, and as I look out at this room, there are so many women here upon whose shoulders I'm standing. I think sometimes in the women's movement we forget to thank the women who preceded us. And I know that I am here today and I'm able to do the work that I do today because of the work many of you did in the 60s and 70s. Opening doors, busting through glass ceilings, and paving the way. The other thing that's not on my resume and typically not in my bio when I get introduced is that I grew up in Fresno, California. How many of you are from California or have lived here for quite a while? All right. So what comes to mind when I say Fresno? Out of curiosity. Raisins, yes, raisin capital of the world, that is true. Farming, yep. I think when I was in high school back in the 80s, we had the distinguished honor of being 292 out of 292 places to live in the United States. And going back and working there now, I can tell you 1 in 3 children lives in poverty, 85 dialects spoken in the school district, the highest concentration of poverty in a zip code in the United States. So shockingly worse than some other communities in the United States that probably come to mind. US Congress published a report calling it the Appalachia of the West. And so growing up in a community like that, with a father who is a hippie and a sociologist, I think I looked around and I saw these huge inequities, experience the world, but something that also compelled me to go back and to really think about how do we solve some of these intractable social problems. So I've really spent the last 25 years as a student of social change. I went to Harvard and studied political science, and I became very interested in the women's movement and the environmental movement and the social movements of the 60s, the New Left, and sort of how change gets created on a large scale. So I was a women's studies minor and learned just a lot about what had happened in the 60s and 70s to organize and to advance social justice in this country. And I will say, back then in the 80s, it seemed like the 1970s to me felt like ancient history. So now when I work with millennials and I talk about work I was doing in the 90s under the Clinton administration, I'm like, oh right, they're thinking I'm so old. And that was all ancient history. But that's the reason that I do the work that I do, and I thought it was important to mention because it's the impetus for why we're here today. I mean, really, I want to help you all think about your own goals. You are all experts on women's issues, and it's an issue that's been near and dear to my heart. In fact, just as an aside, one of my first volunteer experiences was working for a shelter for battered women in Boston. I want to help you today think about why it's important to scale your impact. You heard a little bit about that in the opening remarks. But I also want to talk a little bit about the what. What are we talking about when we say collective impact? I want to unpack that because I think a lot of these terms get thrown around, collaboration, networks, collective impact, etc. And I more specifically want to talk about the how. I want to give you all some tools and some frameworks and some examples that you can hopefully use today when you get into your breakout sessions, and the rest of today is going to be very interactive, that can help you think about how you collectively can advance greater scale of impact on these issues that you all care so much about by working together. So flash forward, after college I got out, I worked for the nonprofit sector. I was working with a lot of social entrepreneurs, running a startup magazine in DC back in the 90s, making almost no money. And like most social entrepreneurs of my generation, I decided the smart thing to do to advance social activism was to go back to business school and get my MBA. So I came back out here to California, my family's all out here. And when I got out of business school, my co-author Leslie Crutchfield and I were both contemplating this emerging field of social entrepreneurship, and we were quite frustrated that there had been a lot of amazing case studies written about fabulous businesses and how they had scaled, books like Good to Great by Jim Collins, which you might be familiar with, and yet very few people had gone out and looked at the most successful nonprofits of our time and figured out how did they scale their impact, because we knew that working in the social sector, it's actually quite different than building a business. It's much harder to scale. The capital markets aren't as conducive to scale. And so while you can have groups like Google and eBay and Facebook that scale very, very quickly in the for-profit sector, that's not always true in the social sector. So we actually decided to go out and study some of the highest impact nonprofits of our time. There was a sense of growing need and urgency. I think when we look around today and we see the problems, whether it's in Fresno or it's globally. I also sit on the board, I'm chairing the board of an organization called Jacaranda Women's Health, which does women's health care in Kenya and is looking to innovate around how we can provide lower cost, higher quality healthcare services for women. Whether it's global healthcare, climate change, poverty, you name it, there's a sense of growing need and urgency that these problems sometimes seem to be scaling faster than our solutions. There are also new tools and possibilities. At the time when Leslie and I set out to do the research for our book, a small organization called Facebook, which nobody at that time had heard of, had just relocated to Palo Alto, California, right? And this was just the beginning of social networking online and social media, and sort of the sense that there are all these new tools for connecting and sharing information and facilitating collaboration. And at the same time, you had the rise of the venture philanthropists and the whole kind of strategic philanthropy movement over the last decade, where you had folks like Bill Gates who were really focused on outcomes and impact. Jeff Skoll, Pierre Omidyar, just to name a few, not to mention the rise of the women's funding movement and a number of women's giving circles all around the country that have cropped up to really focus on giving money to women and girls issues. So these were some of the trends that prompted us to go out and do our research for Forces for Good. We studied 12 high-impact organizations. It took us 2 years to do the research. We didn't find any patterns around the things we thought we would find. What we found instead, as we actually studied these organizations, is what helped them scale their impact was really focusing outside their four walls. So not spending as much time on their internal management and processes. You have to have a well-run organization. That's kind of table stakes. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. They spent as much time or more time focused externally on trying to change the systems around them, trying to get to the root causes of the problems they were seeing, and doing things like advocating, working through government to change policy. First, they started by understanding the system they're trying to change. So that was one of the big breakthrough insights. Secondly, and this was really simultaneous, in the process of trying to understand the system, they had both nonprofits and funders at the table. Again, I think in the social sector, we've gotten quite used to working in ways that are fairly siloed and disconnected, and you rarely have foundations and nonprofits collectively doing strategic thinking and strategic planning around where the opportunities are for big impact, right? Typically nonprofits go to funders, funders have certain grant guidelines, they say we're going to fund X, Y, and Z based on their strategy and the non-impact. So I think getting both funders and nonprofits around the table is really important. Third, they designed for a network, not an organization. So they really invested in building collective infrastructure. This is a network map that we drew to try and visualize how they organized. Cultivate leadership at many levels. One of the things I love about networks is it allows for many people to lead. And fifth, they create multiple opportunities to connect and communicate. So I mentioned a few of those, the online commons. They meet as a whole network once a year in person. All the working groups meet several times a year on their own, and they have online platforms for communicating in between. And then lastly, they have remained adaptive and emergent. So even now, sort of year 9 of their history, they're doing a broad scan and sort of looking at their strategy and figuring out where do we go next as a network. So they continue to evolve the network and their strategies as the environment around them evolves. They started with a common agenda, so a shared understanding of the problem and a common set of goals, right? This is about getting kids from 0 to and through college or some kind of workforce readiness development. So literally from cradle to career. They had a common agenda and a sort of shared vision of what they were trying to achieve. Mutually reinforcing activities, so opportunities to collaborate, and then the backbone organization, which is the infrastructure and shared support for all of this work to happen. I mean, it takes a lot just to pull off a meeting like this today. Imagine having meetings like this going on all around the globe with women leaders coming together, really trying to coordinate their activities in particular regions. That takes shared infrastructure. That's the first step. Let's build these relationships. Let's think about the possibilities. Pretty soon, you'll start transitioning into organizing the network, beginning to actually create shared strategies, set up structures and processes. And I'm working with several networks now, actually going through the process of incubating them. Really, if you look at this left-hand column, it's very similar to creating an organization. You just have to think laterally rather than vertically, right? This is about, can we create a shared purpose? Do we have a structure and strategy? What's our membership model? Do we have leadership and governance? Do we have assessment, communications, and resourcing? So I think the thing that I've learned more than anything else is this requires a mindset shift. It requires thinking in new ways and being willing to sort of look outside your organizational boundaries and to start to see the world through a network lens. So I'm hoping that some of what I've shared with you today and the rest of the work that you're going to do this morning and this afternoon will help you all begin to build a global network that can truly empower and unleash the potential of millions and millions of women and girls. So thank you. questions and comments, and would love just to hear some of your reflections for those of you who have been in. Yes. Oh, okay, sorry, yes.
Hi, my name's Betsy McKinney, and I just wanted to say that we've been meeting with women's organizations from the grassroots level to women in New York and Washington, D.C., and I just wanted to report how many women are ready for the network of women's networks, and it's just tremendously exciting what is happening here today. So I just want to say how it's desperately needed.